Good morning, everyone. There will be, I think, people continuing to join us over the next couple of minutes because we have had a huge registration for today. Obviously, for some of us, it is very sad not to be seeing you in a face-to-face event. Sadly, as I'm sure you all know, the train strike put pay to that. But in fact, this has meant that we've had even more registrations for this morning, for today. So more of you are able to hear the keynotes that we have managed to move remotely. So thank you all for joining us. I'm Emma Knights. I'm Chief Executive at the National Governance Association, and I, as always, have a fabulous team behind the scenes who've made things happen and make things happen today. So Rani, our head of advice, in fact, is on slide duty today. So Rani, if you can move me on, please. The conference, you should have heard by now, has been moved to the 25th of September. That was quite a negotiation to be able to do that. The programme is being slightly amended to take into account that we've covered some things today. Clearly, we're not going to do an exact repetition of this morning, but most of the workshops remain unchanged. So bookings will open very shortly, and those of you who had a place on today's face-to-face conference will get priority in bookings. So if you could move me on, please, Rani. These events are for our MAT members. So you'd be pleased to know I'm not going to read through all the wonderful things those of you who are MAT members get from us. But I'm really pleased at the fact that we now have 60% of trusts buying membership for all of their trusts. So that includes the trust board, the executive, the governance professional, and academy committee members. And in fact, we actually reached 70% of trust schools, because you'll remember NGA used to be an organisation that sold direct to each individual school before we introduced the trust membership. Oh, it must have been about 5 years ago now. So we actually reached 70% of trust schools, and we're hoping in the next year or so that actually we move some of those individual schools that are still members of ours within trusts to the whole trust buying from us. So yeah, this is you represent a really, as it were, big slice of the trust sector, but also sometimes people think, oh, NGA talks to little trusts, but actually we've done that analysis and we know that our members are very representative of the trust sector as a whole. So we actually have lots of middle and now large trusts that are part of our, as it were, NGA family. Sometimes that's because you've grown with us. You might have started as 2 schools, but you're now 10 or 15 or 23. But in some cases, it is the larger trusts actually thinking, do you know what? We really need to get a grip on our governance, and NGA can help us do that. So that's the last of my sales pitch, apart from, we do just need to say that our annual governance survey is open at the moment and continues until just after the next bank holiday. As you know, in the sort of absence of official data, it's this survey that provides that annual picture of what governance in state schools in England looks like, but also your experiences, your challenges, and your concerns. And I can't tell you how often, or I could, but I'd be here for a very long time, how often we refer to that data throughout the year. just a very quick example, we've recently given our evidence to the School Teachers Pay and Conditions Review Body. We are one of the official respondents, and that drew heavily on that information. So thank you for taking the time to do that. We're really conscious that we talk a lot about the workload of those who govern, and then we often ask you to do extra. So it is really valuable data. So now I really am moving on to today's proceedings. This is what we shall be covering this morning. Really pleased that we have John Edwards able to join us remotely, and you will know, I'm sure, that he is Director General of Regions Group at the Department for Education, but in fact has done a whole host of other jobs within the education sector, some within the DFE, such as being a regional schools commissioner. But the first time I met John, really quite many years ago, was when he was at Manchester City Council. So I think that brings a different set of background experiences to the work that he does now. And after John will be presenting to us, and then we will very much have, you know, an open session for Q&A. So please do ask what you would like to. Normally our events, and I'm really proud of that, because like you, I go to lots of remote events, and our events are always very interactive with a lot in the chat. But I know sometimes people are a little worried about asking, whether it be DFE or Ofsted questions, but please please don't be. This is really your chance to, you know, ask those questions and indeed respond to what John has said. And we're very conscious at NGA that we do a lot of talking on your behalf. Yes, we offer governance expertise to DFE, but often we are reporting our conversations or our data to the department. So it's really useful, I think, for actually the department to hear from you, unmitigated and unmediated by me or the rest of the team. So please do take that opportunity. And then following John, we have Warwick Sharp from ESFA, who will be talking about the changes that are coming in terms of simplifying the way in which financial reporting and oversight is carried out. And then for the last hour of the morning, we have a ta-da moment, and we very much wanted this to come to our members first. As you know, for years and years, NGA has worked on the local governance within MATS. You know, there's much experience and literature about being a trustee, because that's not a sort of new concept. But actually, the idea of local governance within a trust is really, I was going to say pretty unique. You're either unique or you're not, aren't you? But it doesn't exist in other sectors. So about 6-7 years ago, we were talking to CGI, the Chartered Institute for Governance, about drawing on some of the experience from other sectors that would help us develop local governance well within the trust sector. And they really tried hard for us to find examples that worked, and they just couldn't. And again, I'm someone who worked in the charity sector for a long time, and we struggled to find equivalents within the charity sector as well. And we did really try hard. Sam Henson, who you'll be hearing from on that slot, he actually attended a CGI conference on international governance to see whether the way in which they worked national countries within that helped, but it really didn't. So we've sort of developed this work, working with you from scratch, publishing sort of year in, year out, good examples of local governance, discussing the challenges, and there's more to today. So we're really pleased to be sharing that with you before anyone else. The journalists wanted it before you, but we thought, no, we're going to talk to our members first. So if you can move me on. I probably ought to say a couple of things, which is, as usual with our events, you will receive the slides later on, but also we will be sharing this recording because it's sort of a halfway house between a conference and a network. But John, thank you so much for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Emma. Just checking you can hear and see me.
I can, yeah, brilliant.
Excellent. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me along to join you for your session. It's a real shame we're not in person. I much prefer the dynamic of that, but it does mean perhaps more people are able to join. So it's good to see and hear from everybody today. I'll just put a disclaimer in. I've got a bit of a cold, so if I pause occasionally and take a drink with the microphone off, do excuse me as I cough and stutter a little bit. So it's probably a good thing that we're virtual. Before I go on any further, I just wanted to give a tiny bit of an introduction to myself, so that you know who you're talking to. Emma kindly referred to quite a few stages of my career. It started as a teacher, so I was a school teacher and senior leader in schools for 11 years. I taught maths, actually, secondary maths, and quite a few times various ministers have said, John, what are you doing here? Get back in the classroom and crack on with your maths teaching career. But anyway, I'm really privileged to have spent time working in schools, including as a teacher governor during part of that time, and then subsequently worked in local government for 14 years, including in Manchester, where Emma, we first met. It's really quite a while ago now, isn't it? I'd previously worked for Kirklees Council and for Wakefield Council as well. So that's enough about the pre-department period. And then 2017, I joined the department as the Regional Schools Commissioner for the East Midlands and Humber region, where I live. I'm very proud to be a Director General of the department and live in Sheffield. I was going to say my kids go to school in Sheffield, but as of 12:30 today, that won't be true because it's my daughter's last day of school before A-levels start next week. So we all had breakfast together and she headed off to school this morning. So a bit of an emotional dad day for me on the school front. So I was a Regional Schools Commissioner, and then I worked in the Education and Skills Funding Agency, and I know you've got Warwick Sharp joining you later, first as Director of Funding and then as the Interim Chief Exec, before becoming the first Director General for Regions Group, and I'll talk about Regions Group again in a couple of minutes. So the next slide has got only 2 words on it, and they are probably the 2 most important words I can use today, which is just to say thank you. I often observe when I'm meeting with trustees and local governors within the school system that most people in the room are being paid to be there, but you are not. And I think that significant contribution that you make to the leadership and to the development of our sectors is something which I hope we as a department never fail to thank you for. So a thank you from me. Governance as a whole, I think, is the best part of 250,000 people across the system as a whole. I think I've got the number right, Emma. We're never quite sure the exact number. It's a bit hard to nail down, isn't it? But something of that order, of which you are a really significant part within the MAT system, and that huge volunteer force plays such an important role in providing strategic direction and providing that leadership and support for the education system right across the country. So thank you for that, and thank you for being such generous givers of your time, your skills, your energy, and your challenge as well to make sure that the system operates as well as it possibly can for all of our children and young people.
Sorry, oh, John,
sorry, yes,
okay,
I coughed.
You sussed it.
I coughed, and then I was trying to avoid you all having to hear me coughing. So the next slide takes me into just a short summary of our group. I like a map, so it has a map. And the Regions Group was formed in summer last year, in July the 4th. Good day to be born. And we brought together in the department a series of functions which had previously been separated out in different parts of the department to form a single Regions Group to focus on improvement, intervention, oversight, and shaping, if you like, in the systems of children's social care, special educational needs, disability and alternative provision, and schools. And so bringing those together with a place-based focus has been a really important step for the department. Recognizing, I think, and really valuing two things. One is that the interaction in the lives of children and families of those services, the universal service of education and the targeted services of SEND and children's social care, that combination is what drives success and outcomes for children and young people. And if we're to achieve those ambitions of 90% of 11-year-olds achieving the expected standard in reading, writing and maths, and improvements at GCSE, it is about every child, and it's about the achievement and opportunity that sits around every child. And what bringing together a regions group has enabled us to do is to place that functionality, be that decision making that my regional directors take on behalf of the Secretary of State, be it our oversight, be it our regulation, to set it all in a broader context of a local place and a region. And you can see that we moved from what had previously been on the schools side, the use of 8 regional schools commissioner regions, into the 9, I don't know if the right word is traditional or whatever you might call them, the traditional regions that have been in place for some time. And I think that's been a really helpful shift for us. So I hope you can see there the sort of purpose of our group. And what the next slide does is just give you some excuse me, some faces to recognize. So we have 9 regional directors, wherever you are, and some of you working in multi-academy trusts will stretch across more than one of these regions, and we work really hard to ensure that whilst we work in regions, we also work across and between ourselves to make sure we have a joined up approach for delivering those priorities. One of the things that's really important is that the regional directors make decisions on behalf of the Secretary of State, and those decisions extend in the school sector to assessing new free schools, to decisions on academy trust oversight, which you'll be familiar about, decisions on the growth of a multi-academy trust or a single academy trust to become a MAT, on intervention, academy transfers, and a whole range of other areas where the regional directors are the decision makers on behalf of the Secretary of State. They also work closely. We work closely as a group with the Minister, Claire Coutinho, the Minister for Children and Families, and the decisions that we make regarding children's social care and SEND and intervention in those spaces, we also make through the regional system. And what that enables us to do is very much to focus in on the needs of a particular place. And that is particularly evident in the education investment areas. There are 55 education investment areas, and within those 24 are priority education investment areas where there is a local needs fund and a local partnership board that advises us on the spend of that additional funding to support achievement, particularly in literacy and numeracy at ages 11 and 16. So that's what we do. From the sort of outwards perspective. We also have a really important role, and that's why I'm particularly keen to be here today as well, which is that we are closest, if you like, within the department to the activities of the schools, children's social care and SEND systems at the front line. And so not only are we here to discharge the department's policies and make decisions and hopefully support you and enable you as MAT leaders, and also those working across the other parts of our sectors to have the best conditions to do your work, but also to take what we hear from that and bring it back into the centre of the department as part of and to help shape policy. Now, so for me, I sit on the department's leadership team. I report to the permanent secretary and sit alongside the directors general for the policy groups, and therefore what I hear and what my teams hear and the way in which we see our policies being delivered locally enables us to bring those back and ensure that place influences policy, and ensure that how these are in delivery influences policy as well. So we can reflect the sector back into the system, as well as hopefully being as successful as possible in delivering the key policies that we're here to ensure operate effectively. So that's a little bit about what Regions Group is here for. And I hope that if you've not met or heard from the regional directors who are on this slide, at least you will know of them and know that we have a really strong team in each of the regions who are responsible for working with you and operating locally to ensure we bring that sort of real broad focus sense of place and understanding and oversight of performance in each of the regions. So that's a little bit about us as a group, and I hope that is helpful. Really, really keen to receive any thoughts or questions on the operation of us as a group and the areas that are most important for us. And I know that regional directors, myself, and all of our teams have the real privilege of spending some of our time visiting schools and trusts, and that is a really important part of our work. But I'm going to move on, if that's okay, just to say a little bit about, excuse me, just to say a little bit about the Academy's regulatory and commissioning review. Now, I could talk about this for a very long time, but I won't. But it's important for me to flag some important aspects of this. The purpose of the review, and obviously you'll be aware that we had the Schools White Paper as well last year, has been to look at how we can maximise collectively between us and yourselves who are working in and leading MATs, the difference that Academy Trusts can make to children's lives so that children fulfil their potential. And we do that through a real focus on quality, good system resilience, but also making sure that all of our processes are proportionate. And I think Warwick's going to talk a little bit later about the financial processes as well as the broader processes that I'm referring to. We know the evidence shows us that high quality trusts deliver extraordinary outcomes for children in their schools, in their wider communities, and as key leading civic institutions as well. And so the role you play, we are trying to complement the best we can in our regulatory activity and our support activity and the way we commission into the system. And so the review has looked at the regulations that the department sets for trusts, looked at how we make decisions and about how the landscape therefore evolves and how we support executive and non-executive trust leaders and how we can best work with the system. The goal being parents and carers can be confident, teachers and support staff feel really well supported, and trust leaders, the executive leaders, you as non-executive leaders, are recognised for the impact they have and have the support to be able to grow and develop. And we're also particularly keen that the trust system is, excuse me again. We're also particularly keen that the trust system grows in a sensible way. If you could just pop the next slide on, sorry. In a way that's coherent locally and in a way that creates the capacity that your MATs provide to take on and turn around underperforming schools. And that sense of creating a coherent system, looking at the geography, looking at the clustering, making sure that the trust system is as strong as possible, and crucially that your MATs have got the strength to take on and turn around underperforming schools is really the essence of what the review has been about. So the next slide, excuse me, sets out, sorry, Emma, I do apologise for coughing and spluttering. Probably is a good job with virtual. The next slide sets out the three aims: a simple, proportionate regulatory strategy, a clear and shared understanding of trust quality, and how we support a self-improving system. And all three of these pillars of the activity have been really central to the partnership working we've been doing. And I know Emma and others, you've had opportunities to feed in as we have gone along. So I'm just going to unpack these a little bit before I then move on to a couple more topics before I close. So the next slide gives a little bit more detail on Chapter 1. The goal of Chapter 1 has been to look at our regulatory approach, make sure it's proportionate, effective, and crucially risk-based. And obviously the regulatory approach to the system has evolved over a period of time. And obviously as the MAT system has grown, well over half of all pupils are educated in academies, many of those in multi-academy trusts, and obviously nearly half of schools in our academies. So making sure we have a regulatory system which is right for now, if you like, has been really important, including fully implementing the arm's length body review of the ESFA, which obviously I was on the other side of. I was leading the ESFA at the time, for a single regulatory interface between the work that we do in Regents Group and that Warwick and his colleagues do under David Withey in the ESFA. Making sure that we are strengthening the requirements in the ATH, the Academy's Trust Handbook, which I know Warwick's going to talk about. And I've just picked out the next slide, which just talks particularly about complaints. It's often an area that I know for governors is particularly important. So I've picked it out of the many areas I could refer to. One of the things we recognised through the review, was a little bit of confusion and duplication around the process for parental complaints, and particularly for parents and carers who the complaint system is there for, were not sure, perhaps are not sure now, about how to raise a complaint or concern about a school or a trust, and where to escalate that. And that has felt as though there'd been some duplication along the way. So we've committed to revising the complaints pages, trialing a virtual assistant, doing some more policy work to understand how it operates as a customer, a parent, a carer, working through that, and introduce more data sharing by this autumn with Ofsted, who, you know, essentially are the other main recipient of complaints alongside us, to support better information sharing, particularly around safeguarding issues as well as complaints. And we'll continue to revise the processes. And this part of my team is currently working on this while also handling complaints as well. So I just thought I wanted to pick that one out, because I know certainly from my days as a parent governor and a vice chair of a maintained school and a teacher governor, that complaints were one of the key areas that we used to think about. The next slide moves on and talks about the second chapter, which is about our commissioning, the decision making that we engage in, the work we do to support the development, growth and evolution of the system, and particularly the goal of making sure that there is greater clarity and transparency around the way in which we, on behalf of the Secretary of State, make decisions, and also the sort of factors that we would consider when looking at the quality of a trust, when deciding on growth, deciding on intervention, deciding on the potential for taking on additional schools, etc. And also making sure that we set that in the context of local regional needs, so that you can understand what we're looking at, I hope, or understand better, and we are able to be clear and straightforward and consistent as possible in the processes that we use. Excuse me. One of the areas that was particularly important was around trust quality, and we have published some trust quality descriptors, which I'm sure you've had a look at, and I know, Emma, that you and your organisation have responded on already. We have built that on the 5 pillars that were set out in the Schools White Paper, Opportunity for All, last year. And we will finalise those descriptors by June, so it's a good time for comments and thoughts on those at the moment. But I think they are really important for us going forwards. We've published trust development statements for the education investment areas, the 55 areas with greatest need, and these set out an assessment of local need, and we've talked to local partners to identify that need, and then described what we see at a reasonably high level as the need in those areas for the development of trusts, where trusts might be able to develop, become really key in the local system, and what types of schools we're particularly keen to see forming into trusts or joining trusts that are already there. And I hope those trust development statements are really useful. So we've also been developing ways to present relevant and appropriate data back to trusts so they can better understand how it's used, and that will continue as well between now and June. And then the next slide just summarises, a bit of a busy slide, so forgive me, the commissioning process, and we've set out the 3 stages. This is, if you like, the stages of the decision-making process for regional directors. And this might be more useful for you to read afterwards rather than for me to go through the detail, but essentially sets out 3 stages that we go through in making decisions. The first is assessing strategic need, which is like the place-based, if you like, and considering the need in a local area. Also looking at what the potential trusts might be for an intervention case, etc., and considering whether the trusts that are in the frame, if you like, have got the right fundamentals, financially strong, any governance issues that would rule any trusts out. We then go into the quality factors, if you like, in making a decision. Excuse me. We then go into the quality factors, which look at quality of education, school improvement capacity, and other trust quality evidence. And those are the trust quality descriptors that we're consulting on at the moment and we'll finalise later. And then that would lead to a recommendation to going to the decision maker, usually the regional director, who will then consider the assessment of strategic need, the quality factors associated with the particular trusts involved, and make a decision with advice from advisory board where appropriate. So that's the sort of three-stage process which we set out, which we hope is helpful. I can see some of the questions being asked of me and Emma's answering them. I quite like that model, Emma. So if we stick with that when we get to the Q&A, that'll work well for me. So that's the commissioning process. And I'm really conscious that it's an area that we're often asked questions about, but I'm going to move on in the interest of time. And then the third chapter sets out how the department wants to support the continued transition to a self-improving system, which has always been really important part of the vision for a MAT landscape. So sharing best practice, supporting trust improvement, establishing peer-to-peer networks and creating new professional development offers. So new regional networks of trust, which you can see referred to here, really important activity, particularly as well alongside the trust and school improvement offer as a way of making sure that the capacity in the sector is developing the sector. And that's very much the TSI model, and it's very much the focus for the regional networks that will come. A MAT CEO leadership development program to help support the next generation of MAT leaders and chairs, which will start next year, as well as the suite of MPQs, which I'm sure you are aware of. Supporting the professional development of MAT chief financial officers, who are such an important part of the MAT landscape, ensuring that all of the resources we have are handled in the best way possible to achieve the maximum impact at the front line while looking after the resources that we're responsible for, be they physical, human, or financial. And so really important chief finance officer mentoring program. And then also continuing to support trust growth and improvement through a multi-year TCAF Trust Capacity Fund. We've not had a multi-year version of it previously, and we hope that introducing a multi-year version along with the trust development statements I referred to earlier provides a little bit of space for MATs and MAT leaders to plan over a period of time. And there are rolling windows for application. We're in the first window of the 23 to 25 TCAF offer at the moment. We also have just the next slide just briefly summarizes our education investment areas where, excuse me, and our priority areas, sorry, do excuse me. If I could just have the next slide, that'd be great. Where we've got trust capacity funding focused particularly in our education investment areas, and also we've got the specific local needs funding in our priority education investment areas. I'm not going to go through the next three slides in detail because I'm conscious of time, Emma, and I do want to leave plenty of time for questions, but they're there for reference and I hope they're helpful. But if I can just conclude on this part, on the regulatory and commissioning review, it's been an incredibly important collaborative effort. It's been very important. It's had really strong ministerial leadership from Baroness Barron, who's the school system minister that I work most closely with, and has been a very important a leader, if you like, in this process. But ultimately, it's about how it works between us and you, making sure that collectively we have a system which is appropriately and proportionately regulated, supported in the right way. We're looking forward and developing capacity, and I hope giving trusts a sense of how we make decisions and what we're looking for in the system going forward. So there might be more questions on that. I really look forward to taking those. Just before I finish, Emma, I just wanted to move on to the slide marked attendance. I've lost track of the numbers, so thank you very much. I didn't want to, I could have written behaviour in attendance, I suspect. This feels like an issue that every school leader, every governor that I've spoken to in the last, in sort of this academic year, as referred to particularly. And I've been talking with lots of different folks about it, which is I think I'll say this, a post-pandemic challenge of returning school attendance, and in some areas sort of behavioural expectations, almost the sort of social contract between school and community. And attendance figures remain a symptom of that, I think. I just wanted to acknowledge that and to note your role, and I know how hard you're all working to address the challenges that have arisen. We currently have over 1/5 of all pupils in the academic year to date meeting the persistent absence rate, which is very high, and the overall absence rate still sits at 7.6%. And we all know that getting kids into school, prioritising attendance, reducing absence, particularly reducing persistent absence, is absolutely critical to achieving our goals. This isn't me berating or anything of that sort. I'm not saying, you know, buck your ideas upon attendance. Please don't read it that way. I'm really interested in your thoughts and the partnership we can operate between us and you, and obviously with our local authority colleagues with whom we also work closely, to support the prioritisation of attendance and the work that we can do to support our school leaders in what we know are some challenging circumstances since the pandemic in particular, particularly for the most vulnerable cohorts, and making sure that we can all support pupils and communities to ensure that this period, if you like, of lower attendance is a short-term issue from which we will re-establish the norms that we all experienced pre-pandemic, when school attendance had been increasing over many years. And certainly I want to hear from you, and as a department we want to hear as well about the ongoing challenge of attendance, and anything we can do, you can do, that we can do together to help bring children and young people into school and achieve that behavior and engagement in school when they're with us. So I know schools do an amazing job in incredibly challenging circumstances. I just want to recognize that, but also open the opportunity for conversation on this important topic. Okay, right, I shall finish there. Last slide, my thank you again, but Emma, it's over to you.
No, thank you so much, John, and we really do appreciate you coming to speak to us, you know, when you clearly have got your, you know, your bug. So it's absolutely no need to apologize. We're much happier to have you here with your cough than to have got a message this morning saying terribly sorry, John can no longer make it. So yes, thank you so much. And there are quite a few topics, because I think I'm going to, but if anyone really wants to use their own words, then do, you know, put their hand up and I will bring you in. But I've just noticed a sort of strand of themes, and I want to perhaps, rather than just picking a single question, John, you know, work it together. I was thinking particularly around the merger and growth questions, but just before I do that, if I can come, I'm really pleased, actually. I didn't expect you to, but I'm really pleased that you did pick out the complaints issue. Our big project that we have just started for the coming year is around governance workload, because it is increasing whatever level you're governing at. And we're really doing a sort of thorough piece of work, which we've just started talking to our members about how we can make it sustainable. And some of it is about being efficient, but actually it's also perhaps about it burgeoning, which fits into your final point about attendance. That's a really good topic that probably 5 years ago we barely had any discussions with our members about, whereas now it's absolutely up there, behaviour and attendance, as a topic that boards are having to rightly engage with. So it's almost as though there's sort of that, you know, spread of things that boards are having to engage with has got larger. So yes, thank you for that, and we'll certainly, we already do engage with the governance unit and others around complaints, but we will be doing even more so, because the burden of handling complaints on volunteers is too great actually to be sustainable. So yeah, any working together with others is on that topic is really important. But shall we dive into that sort of growth mergers question? And there were sort of a number of questions. One about, you know, what are you, I don't know, expecting of SATs, but also smaller MATs came up, and that tension between them wanting to grow themselves, but perhaps sometimes being encouraged to join a larger MAT. So that sort of merger, a little one. And I know perhaps I shouldn't use the word being taken over, but that's how it's often described to us. So we've done a lot of work around mergers. We have some guidance on it, and we really do talk to people about trying to make it a marriage of equals. But there's a real issue about that, of people sometimes thinking they're being acquired. So that's why often the growth is seen as the strategy. So yeah, over to you for any thoughts on that idea of size and.
Thank you. Yes, and it's a really good topic to have a conversation about. I mean, I think, sorry, excuse me. I mean, I think the starting point is that we know that the best MATs are achieving extraordinary outcomes, and many of them do that by having a mixture, if you like, of commonality across all the schools in the MATs. On a range of different aspects, which can achieve consistency on curriculum. They can reduce workload for staff by having curriculum materials that are collectively produced, by having behaviour policies that are consistently applied, and by, if you like, having a staff group who are deployed flexibly against an operating model that has a degree, not complete uniformity, but has a degree of commonality, which enables the flexible deployment, development of careers, and the use of leadership capacity to address sometimes the challenges in individual schools, and sometimes the opportunities to grow staff who would otherwise be waiting, if you like, for another opportunity, but can do so in the MAT. So for the sort of workforce, for workload, and for consistency of using the very best evidence-based approaches, we know that the best MATs have degrees of consistency. Now, it varies a lot. Some MATs have high degrees of consistency, are sort of in the 80-20 sort of space, and some of them have lower levels of consistency, but I hope they all have the same focus on quality and outcomes. And the point about consistency that I just wanted to make is, I was talking to a large MAT recently, well, middling large MAT about this recently. The CEO there was saying to me, and actually the chair was there as well, was saying to me, you know, the consistency is not the vision of one person that is imposed on every school. It is the collection of the evidence of what works across all of our schools. And that sense that drawing together not sort of one person's vision that's imposed across 20, 25, 30, 10, 8, 5 schools, whatever it might be. Rather, it is the collection of what works best, that can form the core of a consistent delivery model that enables the sharing of resources, the reduction of workload, and enables the development of career pathways and deployment of staff. It's a collaborative process in which, why wouldn't you, if you like, use that which works across the system? And sometimes it is, you know, important to listen to that point. Well, that might work there, but it wouldn't work here. And in my career, I've worked in the school system for over 30 years. I've heard that said to me many, many times. More often, I've heard people say, actually, we've used the evidence, we've brought that into our practice, and we've seen that it does work here. But yes, there might be 20, 30, 40, 50, 60% of it that you need to vary to suit a local place. But evidence is, whether that be drawn from the Education Endowment Foundation's work, or whether it be drawn from work within a trust, the collaborative development of consistent approaches in key aspects is at the heart of the development of the success of trusts. We see it in individual schools. If you work in a large school, there are consistencies of, you will have an assessment policy that works across your school, you will have a behaviour policy that works across the school, but you'll have things that are done differently within different, perhaps, year groups, or perhaps subject areas, depending on the type of school. And just as the same way, when you work across a trust, we see, and I hear leaders talk to me about that real strength of drawing on all of the evidence that they can see and using that to deliver the very best offer right across all of the trust schools. So what does that mean? It means that I think as a department and for ministers, that we absolutely value the role that single academy trusts play and that multi-academy trusts play in the system, but we do value opportunities being taken for single academy trusts to become part of, whether that be joining or whether it be in some cases forming a multi-academy trust, so that we can have that benefit for the workforce, for the workload, for the development of resources, all of those things in more schools. So it is an encouragement in a direction of travel. It is certainly not a sort of a forced process or anything of that sort, but it is an encouragement of a direction of travel. And when it comes to size, I think the one thing that we do recognise is that MATs particularly find that geographical clusters are particularly effective for some of the reasons I said, actually, around the sharing of staff and the development of staff pathways. And so whilst, you know, we don't have a sort of maximum size or a minimum size or anything of that sort, we know that there are certain points at which trusts are able to really benefit from some of the aspects of scale, and we know that geographical clustering can be helpful in enabling that sharing of resource and sharing of staff. None of this is about fixed rules. It is about context, which is why our three-stage commissioning process includes that contextual understanding and what's right in you know, well, take two places I know really well. What's right in rural Lincolnshire and what's right in the centre of Nottingham are might be two different things when answering the question about the development of a multi-academy trust, and we recognise that. And I hope that our decision making is contextualised, but also values what we know is the strength that lies within individual schools as they join trusts and become part of that opportunity to use the best evidence and the best support we can to deliver for children and young people.
Thank you, John. Gosh, you said so much there. It was really rich. I really like some of your expressions, that the way you described collaborative development of approaches. And absolutely, I think I may be wrong if I'm speaking for most people on this call, but I think most people on this call would subscribe to that philosophy. It's a fact, isn't it, that we have a sort of spectrum of trust, from the ones that are slightly more command and control. I'm not, you know, I'm using that language lightly, but more centralized perhaps is a better word, to those that still use the word, perhaps rightly or wrongly, about autonomy of their schools. We would argue wrongly. Do you think that more trusts are now sort of occupying that centre ground, which you very compellingly described?
So I think, I mean, there's a little bit of a context situation. So if you're taking on a failing school, if you're a trust taking on a school that's failing to provide an education that's needed for those children, there will be, it's absolutely right that at that point, tried and tested techniques and tried and tested approaches are brought in to ensure that that school turns around. That's what we want multi-academy trusts and multi-academy trust leaders to do. There will also, even in schools that are struggling, be nuggets of brilliant practice, which you will find along the way, and they might well find their way into the trust's broader operating model going forwards. They might well do that, and that is a part of the richness of the process. So that balance will vary, but I do think a lot of trusts now, particularly with the rise of the use of evidence and the sort of recognition, that there are that teachers are increasingly, and it's a good thing, inquiring into the evidence behind the techniques they use. It's been, so that's been a development in the last 10, 15 years, which has been extraordinarily powerful in what happens in the classroom. And trusts themselves are now developing their own evidence and drawing on what they see from right across their schools. And some of the trusts that, in taking on a lot of failing schools in the past, have had a lot of, right, we're going to do A, B, C, and D, because that will help us to move from a school that's failing to a school that's succeeding. Also recognize that there is strength across many of the approaches that they take. And I don't know if it's a middle ground, Emma, or if it's an evolved model, but I do think that evolved model of, yes, consistency, but it's collectively derived, if you like, from the very best of practice that is seen right across the schools in the trusts. And I know some trusts sort of take the view that, please, if you're going to try something new in your behavior management and you're a confident and successful school, then try it. But we either learn from it and bring it into the trust model, or we learn that it wasn't more successful, in which case we go back to the approach that's been successful in another school, perhaps. And that kind of approach of being constantly inquiring and looking for the evidence, I think, is really powerful in the development of a strong core model for most multi-academy trusts. I mean, really keen to hear from, I mean, you guys do this on an individual trust basis. I sit here looking at the system as a whole, so I want to hear from you as well as you hearing from me, but that's my take on it.
Great. So just to push on a couple of those, sort of going back perhaps to nearer to where the original questions were phrased, just two related issues. One is if the small map has a growth strategy. So obviously now is the time of year that most trusts begin, don't they, to review their strategy for the coming year and go back over that target, that growth expectation for this year. So again, something we learned from our surveys, when we compare the number of trusts that wanted to grow over the year and the number that actually succeeded, it's far below. So anecdotally, then are often, and I know I'm generalizing terribly, our smaller trusts are saying, we perhaps aren't given as much attention when we say, hang on, we'd like to grow here and add this school or that school to us, whereas the preferred option tends to be, no, we'd rather be more, we, the department, would rather be more secure and offer that school to a larger trust. So is that, and I know one of the aims coming from the white paper is more about transparency, and when you were looking at your regulatory and commissioning, that sort of middle section of how you make those decisions. So I suppose I'm really trying to tease out, I know it'll be case by case by case, but you're not going to look at that sort of 4-school trust that wants to grow to an 8-school trust and be trying to convince them necessarily that instead they should be joining a middle-sized trust, question mark.
So I mean, again, I mean, I think you're in the question, I think, Emma, you've said that it will be case by case, and that is absolutely true. We've put out trust development statements for 55 of local authority areas, and one of the goals of those trust development statements is to sorry, excuse me. One of the goals of those trust development statements is to give a sense of whether it feels as though, for example, in some areas, there is a real need for some more primary trusts, for example. And we need a strong trust landscape, because that is the mechanism by which we take on failing schools, and your leadership then drives improvement in schools that are failing to deliver for children, young people and communities. So there are some areas where the trust development statement makes clear that we are looking for sort of new trusts. There are other areas where, in truth, we don't say that, and that's because we recognize that consolidation and growth of existing trusts is a more productive model for a good shape going forwards. And there will be some areas where the merger of trusts or coming together of trusts would be beneficial to achieve some of the scale and some of the opportunity to really grow the best of practice across a range of schools would help. And so I think that we've got our Trust Capacity Fund, which is there to support growth, particularly in the education investment areas. And we've said that we, in making decisions on the allocation of that funding, will look at trust development statements, but more generally as well, it's absolutely our wish to reflect what the local situation is. I think my sort of broad point would be, and this might be the point at which you eject me from the call, Emma. So it's been good to talk, but I don't mean this in any patronising way at all, and please don't take it that way. But in any sector, it is rarely the case that every existing player can grow. And so one of the real governance challenges, and this is where you as governors, as against your school leaders, and I'm not trying to set you and them apart, but your adherence to the charitable objectives of your trust, which is to deliver for children and young people, for your community, or however you've worded it, your adherence to that, and looking beyond, if you like, your organization to the goals that you have for children, young people in the community, is a key part of governance and of charity governance, which is what you are involved in. And And, you know, I'm not saying something I haven't tried to do myself as well in the past. And I do think some of the hardest decisions are those that look beyond your organizational frame to your goals, if you like, and ask the question about how best to achieve those goals. And there are often sort of points, aren't there, where you will consider as an organization, perhaps you've got a leadership change, you've reached a point, if you like, where natural growth has reached an end, and you know that scale is something that would benefit you. You could develop a whole range of more efficient, more effective services. You could trial and test educational techniques. You could develop more career pathways, all of that if you had bigger scale. And in that system, that stepping into the conversation that says not we would be taken over, but that we can partner with others. And, you know, if you take the model that I've described, where the best of practice is drawn from every school in a trust, the great work that your teachers and your community does in your school can form part of a new one. So I would just appeal to that, away from the our trust, my trust, to the our goals, my goals for the children and young people in the community, and really appeal to that sense of the charitable objective of achieving for children and young people. And some cases that can be achieved by taking your part of the system and bringing it towards another part of the system.
Thank you. I'm really conscious of time because there's so many other questions I wanted to pick
sorry.
up with you, but we only have you for a short period. But equally, our delegates need a moment's break too, I think. But that was a really great point to end, because I actually was really conscious that I haven't really mentioned pupils in anything that I've said, but you know, our members do start from that. You know, we know our mission. I don't expect you to have memorized our good governance graphic, but it starts, the foundations are around mission and values. So I'm sure that people will be looking at that strategy from that starting point. But there's other things that would have been good to talk a bit more about place, which you remember, again, really pleased to hear you talk about place. That's so important to most of the people that volunteer, and how we make that work in a sort of mixed economy of schools. But I think we'll need to come back to that on another time perhaps. And I'm also conscious I didn't ask you the couple of governance questions that came up, but Sam Henson, my colleague, has answered one of them in the chat, that you know, you don't have a preferred model of governance, and in one sense that's partly, you know, what NGA's role here is, looking at the different models and what works. So a really big thank you to you, John, and obviously we'll continue talking to your colleagues who are working on the commissioning guidance and others. But if there is another way, I feel as though we want to continue this conversation, particularly your you know, query around attendance and behaviour. Perhaps that's a topic again, rather than, you know, asking you to talk about structures, but to actually talk about those issues, which I expect. See, I shouldn't really do this before I've seen the data, but I expect to see more of that coming across in our survey this year. So yes, thank you for being with us, and get better soon. And we'd love to follow up some of those other issues at a later date.
Thank you, Emma. Always happy to come back. Take care all, and thanks for what you do.
Bye-bye. So everybody, I didn't curtail that, and we are supposed to be having a short break. I think I will still, if I'm allowed to chair's prerogative, if we just, Martina, close down just maybe for 3 minutes rather than for the slightly longer session, just to allow people to boil a kettle or a comfort break, and then we will be back with Warwick at I will make that 11:03. See you all in a minute. Okay. Will we go back? Hello, everyone. I hope you managed to make use of our 3 minutes break. And Ronnie, if you could move me on to the next slide, please. I'm really pleased that Warwick has been able to join us today remotely again. Not quite the same, but I think it'd be a really useful complement to what John Edwards has just been talking to us about, which you may have caught, some of you, but we very much wanted to make sure the work that you're all doing at the ESFA was brought to the attention of our members. Obviously, we do disseminate what we can when we can, but sometimes some of this doesn't immediately strike the sector in the same way, perhaps as changes to things that are more, let's just say, education immediately. Education focus. So Warwick, as it says here on his slide, is Director of Schools Financial Support and Oversight, and recently, in fact, you were Acting Chief Executive of ESFA, weren't you? So I actually think of you as Deputy CEO. Maybe I shouldn't do, but I'd also like to thank Warwick for the work that he and his team have done with us over the years, because we've always found it very easy to work with you, to exchange information. You keep us updated on a lot of issues when they're in the pipeline. I feel as well, we've known you in a number of guises. I can't remember if it was the first time we met you at one of our face-to-face events when Damien Hines was Secretary of State, and he came to address the conference, didn't he? And you stage managed that for us. So thank you, Warwick, and over to you.
Emma, thank you for a very kind introduction. Really appreciate it. Really pleased to be here today. So, as Emma says, I am Warwick. I'm Director of School Financial Support and Oversight at the ESFA. I joined the predecessor to the DfE about 15 years ago now. It's hard to believe. Myself, after a brief spell teaching, I've done various things. Principal Private Secretary to three Secretaries of State, including Damien Hines, and I was really pleased to come. I remember it well, that particular NGA event, and was really pleased to be invited today and to speak to all of you, in large part because what you do is so important. And John said this very well, and I won't repeat it, but I spend the great bulk of my time working with Academy Trusts, and I know the importance of what trustees and governors and boards do. That's certainly true of some of the complex cases we work with, but it's true of every case that we see. So we rely on all of you to do what you do, and for that reason I was particularly keen to come along, and thank you for having me today. I do hope this is a good complement to what John was saying. We work very closely with Regions Group, so ESFA and Regions Group are the key partners Within DfE, we're focused on funding and finance, but it's a very close interface. So today, I was going to speak for something like 15-20 minutes, allow time for questions, and really keen to hear from you and anything you want to ask or say or feedback. I was going to cover a bit of context first of all. So the sector as we see it at the moment, the role of the ESFA, John touched on that very briefly. I was going to expand on 3 areas which I think it's worth a bit of unpacking. So school resource management, what we call the simplification agenda, and then some sources of information for trustees and governors. And then I was going to talk a bit about how we work with academy trusts, schools more broadly, but particularly academy trusts at the moment through what I know is a challenging time and the kind of support that we can offer and how we want to work with you. So I hope that sounds okay. And as I say, we'll leave lots of time at the end for thoughts and questions. So if we go on to the next slides, a bit of context about the sector. There are, of course, cost pressures. This is true of every sector at the moment. We're really conscious. Rising energy bills, are they thankfully coming down now? Staff pay going up, and some continuing uncertainty around staff pay. So that's a big bit of the context at the moment. Another bit, of course, is the continuing drive to make sure every pound is spent as well as possible, and that's something we focus a lot of our attention on, working with academy trusts. Thirdly, the academy sector, is very closely scrutinised at the moment. I mean, this is a bit of a misperception, I think, because I spend a lot of my time speaking to Public Accounts Committee, to MPs, to various audiences, and often people don't realise the scale of the oversight and the scrutiny, but I know that's a big job for all of you and everyone who works in the sector. And of course, we're keeping a close eye on school and academy trust financial health at the moment, making sure trust can continue as a going concern, but more than that, can be financially healthy despite the challenges at the moment. So that's a bit about the context. It is clear that the sector, despite some of the challenges, is doing very well. I won't read all the statistics on the slides, but the very great majority are in surplus or the zero balance. The very great majority receive unqualified opinions. The standards of financial management and governance are clearly high. And that is down to executive teams, but it's down to all of you as well. And only a tiny number are subject to what we call a notice to improve, which is the most serious form of intervention. So various challenges, but the sector is doing well. If we go on to the next slide, ESFA's job is to work with the sector to help support. And I think the next slide will come in a sec. And thank you very much. So we help look after the money. 3 main outcomes that we're trying to achieve. Certainty. So we want to put out over £60 billion of public money, and we want to do it in a way where you know exactly what's happening, it's accurate, it's timely, you know exactly what to expect, you're clear about responsibilities and requirements, the frameworks are clear and you can influence them, the information about funding is available, including through our emerging digital funding service. We then want to support providers, in this case can be trusts, to use that money well. So that's direct support if providers are in difficulty, it's advice, it's tools and benchmarking services, etc., which I'll touch on a bit more later on. And then part of our job is assurance. So we need to report to Parliament, and more generally public and taxpayers, but directly through Parliament, to make sure the money is used for the purposes intended. And that is about building capacity across the sector. It's about monitoring how the money is spent, investigating where there are issues, clearly that's a small number of cases, and where there are issues, taking action, recovering funds if necessary. So context of the sector, and this is our role in it. I was going to expand on 3 areas next, and then talk more broadly about how we want to support all of you through what I know is a challenging time. So our SRM offer, School Resource Management, so this is something that we're really excited about. We've put together a set of tools and sources of advice and support, which should really help schools build financial capacity and expertise, and help all of you use every pound to go as far as possible. This is a set of things which have been co-developed with the academy sector in particular, and so they're designed to be directly useful. So it's things like teacher vacancy service, it's things like frameworks to help trusts make purchases that are value for money, access to digital services, benchmarking websites, so you can compare against other schools and trusts. In particular, I would call out our School Resource Management Advisor service. So these are accredited experts who their day job is often to work with trusts, but we also ask them to be deployed into other trusts to give advice about budgeting, about financial planning, about management. And that is a set of findings that is for the trust to use. So it's for you, but that is a great, really high quality service. We're interested in anything more we can do to build capacity and support the sector, and I'm sure we'll make these slides available. There are a number of links on the right hand side. There are lots more actually, but we thought those might be particularly helpful. So things like at the end, good estate management for schools, something we spent quite a bit of time on recently. We're piloting capital advisors, and that should hopefully be a useful document. If we go on to the next slide, I was also going to expand on what we call the ISFA's Financial Simplification Project. And so a bit of background on this, first of all. The financial oversight framework that we're responsible for is pretty extensive, isn't it? And it's pretty robust. And there's obviously good reason for that, because if you're responsible for tens of billions of pounds of public money, and you need to report to Parliament, and you've got responsibility to public taxpayers, the sector. We need to make sure it's used for the purposes intended. But actually, in truth, I think what's happened is it's developed over time. We've added and added and added. We haven't actually, I don't think, ever taken anything out of it. So this is a chance to review it and to think, is it working as well as possible for trusts, for academy trusts? Is it proportionate? Is it appropriate for a sector that has matured? Is it as least burdensome as possible? And so we gathered together a number of CFOs and CEOs and sector representatives, including NGA, and with thanks to Emma and her team, to gather a number of proposals together. And we got 74 proposals back. I mean, naturally, we can't do absolutely everything that was asked of us, but we can do quite a lot. And so there were a number of improvements we're trying to make, cutting out duplication between financial returns, improving the funding information, potentially working with Treasury around delegation thresholds. So we'll say more about that, particularly around the publication of this year's Academy Trust Handbook in the summer. But this is a really serious attempt to try and streamline and improve the oversight framework. And I know that's a big thing for all of you, and takes up a lot of time and energy. And then on the next slide, so I went through all of this in detail, but just wanted to make sure that you had access to and knew about where to find the Academy's Trust Handbook, which of course you'll be aware of, which sets out the core functions of Academy trustees. I talked at the start about how important these are. It's absolutely clear to us that trusts need the vision, ethos, and strategic direction the board sets. Executive leaders and teams need to be held to account, and that's part of the structure of how the system works. And I've got particular interest in this, of course. Financial performance needs to be overseen and needs to be effective. The governance handbook as well talks about delivering effective financial management, and talks about strategic leadership, accountability, people structures, compliance, and evaluation. Again, I know you'll be well familiar with that. At the bottom, some additional guidance that's available for trusts. I was going to move on to the next couple of slides and pause on these just slightly longer. And the theme of these is about how we support schools and trusts through the current context. And we're conscious that some trusts may be facing financial challenges at the moment. I mean, all trusts will be facing cost pressures, and all trusts have their own unique set of circumstances and local context, which may or may not make things more challenging at the moment. So our starting approach is always to support a trust. I mean, when we look at the data across the system, when we look at the experience of all of our caseworkers, when we look at what the aggregate analysis is telling us, the sector is in a strong position to work through the challenges at the moment. But I don't for a second think that's easy, and it might require a number of difficult choices around spend and around choices and around priorities and around reserves. If you are in a trust which feels you're in particular difficulty at the moment, please do get in touch with us. We put the link to the online form on our homepage there, and I would just want to absolutely try and emphasise our approach really is to try and support a trust. To start with a supportive conversation, to try and make sure we understood the challenges, to try and signpost to the support that's available and the tools, to talk about the practical ways that we may be able to support. Ultimately, that could include actual financial support in different forms, short-term advances, help with cash flow, longer-term support. We would try and be as supportive as possible. Of course, there were times that we see issues and have to help you tackle them, but actually it's a very, very small number of cases. And please do get in touch if you feel that we can help you at all. And we just got to the last slide, if that's right. More broadly, I mean, keen to work in partnership. I mean, that's something we've always done with NGA, as Emma was saying at the start, and that's a relationship we're very grateful for. We want to work in partnership generally across the whole sector and with all of you. I won't read every word on this slide because I know we're a little short of time and keen to allow time for any thoughts, questions. But I will do a bit of a brief summary. So there are trust webinars and roundtables. We run these things called power hours that cover hot topics of the day. So cost pressures, cybersecurity. Also run sessions for Academy Trust professionals. Great feedback from those. People find them very helpful. They're well attended. So please do join if you can. We run a number of financial working groups. So these are important when we develop our policy and our documents, and we always make sure that trustees, chairs, represented on those, as well as exec team members, financial assurance support. So trying to help with understanding of the frameworks that relates to the simplification agenda I was talking about. We publish guidance to support the sector. So for instance, we've recently put out updated guidance on this year's budget forecast return with a supporting letter from David Withy, the ESFA CEO, and we will continue to put out guidance where we think that would be helpful and always welcome feedback. So executive pay is another example where we've done that. Operating as a going concern is another example. And then the number of improvements we're trying to take forward to financial oversight and regulation. I mean, John talked about some of these, actually, the descriptors of high quality trusts, the commissioning framework, the regulatory approach and the single interface. He covered that well, I won't cover it again, but there is a particular financial and funding element to all of those things. So the high quality trust descriptors contains a financial section. So we're really closely involved in all of that. I mean, I was going to stop there because I think that's probably enough from me apart from the questions. But just to say again, welcome feedback. Really keen to work with you. Very grateful you do, and keen that this is as much partnership as possible. And Emma, I'll stop there and see if there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Warwick. That was really, really helpful in setting out the sort of whole spectrum of work that's going on and how it fits together. And I think it's made me think, as you were speaking, that perhaps we ought to, as organisation, if we don't get a chance to get much feedback today from members, think about if there's anything particular for trustees that would be useful for you to be producing, and we could have a conversation about that. But I did know on this topic people might not be as forthcoming, so I've sort of set up Bobby Thandy to come in and ask the first question from you. Bobby, well, it's going to look as though I chose Bobby because he's one of my bosses. He's an NGA trustee, but also he's both a business leadership professional in a trust and is a trustee of another trust. So he sees this from so many angles. So over to you, Bobby. What were your thoughts or questions after hearing Warwick?
Helpful in terms of framing that, and I think a bit of feedback for you is that information, documents and guidance that's already out there is really, really helpful and useful in many, many ways. Questions really. One was around, obviously you touched on it actually, that there's some work you're doing around reserve policy guidance coming out. And obviously, while everybody's working on the financial plans as we speak, is there a kind of almost like a threshold of reserves that we should all be working towards? And I know that it's not something that you really want to put out there as a kind of a directive, but lots of conversations with DFE colleagues has kind of indicated reserves, healthy reserve levels based on your reserve policy and risk appetite should be within a particular threshold. It'd be useful to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And my aim is to be able to set out a range. It's not necessarily my aim to do that exactly at this moment in time, but it's our aim to work towards doing that, because I think this is an area where I think we can be clearer. And certainly some of the feedback I've had from the sector, which is fair enough, I think, is that obviously ESFA has an interest, and DFE has an interest in reserve levels, but it's not saying exactly what those reserve levels should be. And we've stood back a little bit because it is for trusts, it genuinely is for trusts. But there are at least ends of the spectrum where I think you'd look at the levels and you'd think, is this right? I mean, we have started an exercise to have conversations with trusts that hold reserves of more than 20% of income. That was actually a direct request of Public Accounts Committee. So we started to get that information through the budget forecast return last year and again this year. And it might be the case that trusts can articulate really good reasons, big capital projects, etc. And it might seem to colleagues on the call that it's odd that I'm focusing on such a big number, but there's actually quite a large number of trusts that hold reserves at that level. And at the opposite end of the spectrum, I mean, if you're down at 1%, 2% of income, it would seem difficult for a trust to really confidently articulate how they could have the contingency for any challenges that came through, but I recognise the context. So I hope we can be clearer, but we need to do more work, including with lots of you, to get the guidance right before I just say a couple of numbers.
Yes, thank you. It is really important, isn't it? A topic particularly, well, always actually, but in the current context, and when not every trust and school finds themselves in similar positions, it's also quite a sort of emotive issue too, isn't it? Just you may there's been a little bit of a debate in the chat about notice to improve, and yes, sort of actually at one level having that transparency is great, but at another it can feel, well, if it's done to you it feels like a name and shame. So can you say a little bit more about the impact of them, and that really sort of, I suppose, convince those people that aren't entirely convinced that actually they're an important part of getting financial management right?
Yeah, of course. I'll preface this by just being really clear that 1% of Academy trusts have a notice to improve, so 99% don't. And the very, very great majority of colleagues on this call will never experience a notice to improve or a conversation about a notice to improve, and may never hear the words notice to improve. ever again. I just want to be really clear about that. But there are cases across the system where there are serious issues around the financial management and governance, and we can all think of the names of cases in the past, and it affects us all, because these cases affect the whole reputation of the academy sector, and there are times, it's extremely rare, shown by that data, but there are times when we look at a case and we haven't got confidence that a trust can has the capacity to solve those issues by itself. And so a notice to improve is a way of signalling the seriousness of the issues, and normally alongside there will be some removal of delegations, so additional approvals needed for ESFA, not for the day-to-day running, not for paying staff, that kind of thing, but for additional payments. There would often be additional financial support put in, but there would be conditions put around that. It's certainly my experience, and I will sign these things and take personal accountability for them. It's certainly my experience that trusts take them very seriously, and they almost always lead towards improvement with our support. I mean, if they don't, there are even more serious consequences. But again, it's a very rare tool in the system.
Thank you. This question sort of goes back. Well, it's a little bit related to the reserves point. There are clearly, aren't there, some trusts that are setting deficit in-year budgets and relying on reserves. This is sort of a question really about what your reaction is to that. Is does that worry you? Does it lead to any sort of response from ESFA, or is that something you are really expecting to see in increasing numbers over the next few years?
Yeah. I mean, it certainly wouldn't immediately lead to a response from the ESFA. I mean, in completely sort of steady states, if we're in sort of completely normal times, in any 1 year, you might expect half of trust to set a deficit budget, because there would be some, sort of up and downs of the budget management as you invest in capital projects, etc., as there are particular challenges. So in itself, I mean, it's much more about the cumulative position, the overall financial health. I mean, just to be really transparent about what we do, so we get the budget forecast return in the summer. There are other sources of information that we get, the academy accounts, of course, and we will look at them, and we will look where there seem to be potentially serious issues, so where a trust is in deficit rather than in-year deficit, because in-year deficit with decent reserves is very different from being actually in deficit, or where there's very seriously declining reserves, or where a trust comes forward and says we need some help. I mean, that's a minority of cases, and in those cases, quite genuinely, what we try and do is offer a supportive conversation. And in a number of those cases, the trust will say to us, it's okay, we've got a plan. This is our plan. In a number of other cases, we might offer some tools. We might help deploy a school resource management advisor. It's for the trust to own that. The trust owns the findings. We don't. It's for the trust. And so it certainly wouldn't lead to immediate reaction. We try and be proportionate. I mean, even where we did get in touch, I mean, it's a genuine attempt to be supportive and offer support and have a conversation, as opposed to starting with anything more serious.
Thank you. One of the issues we're hearing much more from members about over the last year has been buildings and estates, but actually I don't think there are any questions today on that, so that might be a topic for another day, perhaps after we've had our survey results in. So I just wanted to finish on the topic where you mentioned very briefly earlier on, executive pay. Obviously, yes, that is the role of the people on this call today. And I know that from our conversations, you've been doing lots of work on this over the last year. Is there anything anything more that you can offer trustees in terms of advice on that topic?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and so hope to say more later this year about this. But essentially, what we're in the process of trying to do, and the context is important, I think. So the clear majority of academy trusts set reasonable levels of executive pay. There are outliers, and it is pretty clear from the data that there are some outliers, and certainly in some of those cases, I think all of us, or at least nearly all of us, would look at those outliers and they'd think, this isn't quite right. And so part of our role is to challenge that. And so we will go through a process where we help identify those outliers and have conversations with the trusts. My experience of doing this in the past, and we're going to try and do it in a more nuanced way than in the past. We've got a really diverse sector, different sizes of trusts, so we're trying to use intelligent metrics around this. My experience of doing it in the past is often that the chair would say in response, you get a range of responses, but the most common one was, well, look, actually, it's helpful you've been in touch, because to be absolutely honest, I wasn't exactly sure, what the level should be. I mean, I know NGA has done a lot of great work in this space. It's not an easy thing, is it, to benchmark, in a diverse sector. And so our aim is to help with that, to help, and it's definitely not going to be saying, this is what it should be. It's a decision for all of you in your local contexts. More advice, more support with benchmarking, and then more activity around, where there are, and it'd be a small number of cases, but where there are a very small number of clear outliers that I think we'd all look at. We're keen to do more to follow this up, but it's something we're working on at the moment. And Emma, I've said that for a while, I think, but we are close, I think, honest.
Great. No, thank you so much. There you go. You see, Warwick, I was hoping for a scoop today, but it's still it's a coming
Absolutely.
soon. Thank you so much, Warwick, for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and we will keep that dialogue going. And so, to our members that are here on the call, if there are things that I haven't covered, or things that when you take away and reflect and see Warwick's slides you want to come back to us on, then please do. As Warwick has said, there's this great big piece of work going, a rather complex piece of work to simplify the system and the resources. So it's really useful for both the SFA, but also for us at NGA to hear about your experiences as trustees. And between us, we absolutely want to make sure that the resources are fit for purpose. Going back to what I said about John, we're really conscious how much work you have to do and how much guidance you have to read, and we need it to be absolutely directed at you. So please point out things to us that you think could be improved. But yes, thank you very much, Warwick, for joining us. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. So now, having had the regulators with us, we now move back in-house, and I hand over the stage, as it were, to Sam Henson, who I'm sure most of you know is our Director of Policy and Communications, and along with two other members of our team, Meg and Faria, is going to report on the work that we continue to do. It's our sort of business as usual, looking at the good practice of governance within MAT. So this is our latest offering today. So this is our ta-da moment, isn't it? Over to you, Sam, to introduce the new report.
Brilliant. Thanks, Emma. Hi, everyone. Really brilliant to be here today. And I think we've had two really great sessions, and I think we're really excited to be releasing this new report. It will be live on our website at the end of this session. So you are getting an exclusive, but it's only for an hour. But never mind, you're still hearing about it before anyone else. I think it's going to going to be really good just to talk through some of it, and Meg and Faria are going to go through the process and what we found. I'm just going to, before I hand over to them, just introduce why we've done this piece of work, where it's coming from, and really what we've tried to do, and what this is all rooted in. So if you could move the slides on, please. Thank you. I thought it was just worth starting with a sort of setting this in the scene of the things that we've been hearing about today, really. So I don't need to go into too much detail. We've obviously talked about the white paper, the regulatory and commissioning review, and now the trust, the high quality trust descriptions. I think the key thing to mention here is, you will know NJ was delighted that governance not only featured when the white paper was first released, but actually it was quite a prominent feature, and there was the inclusion within that on the expectation that trust would have local governance. Now, moving forwards a year, we've got slightly different wording now, which I've put there. But whilst I think it's fair to say there's perhaps less in terms of the level of prescription in terms of what trusts need to be doing, actually the DFE very much recognises that the vast majority of trusts, in fact, we would say pretty much nearly all, have local governance. The discussions around whether it is going to be a part of the system going forwards very much have moved on. And I think, you know, we really want to make the case that actually now, I think we need to turn our attention to actually thinking about actually what does good practice look like, and what are the basic expectations that are needed across the sector to make local governance and trust meaningful. So I think what we've really sought to do is build on that premise, and I think Megan Faria's report has really done that. So it's going to be really good to see. One very quick thing I will add to that, though, is if you haven't had a chance to look at the DFE trust quality descriptions yet, obviously do have a look. We did release a news page on its release just to flag the point that at the moment it doesn't specifically mention local governance in itself, and whilst it talks about trust boards needing to anchor their decision making very much in the community voice, local stakeholder voice, I think there is a point here that we do need to recognise that stakeholder engagement is not exactly the same thing as local governance. And I think as we go through the session today and the findings from the report that Megan Faria have written, we'll see that actually the vast majority of trusts, whilst they do delegate the remit of stakeholder engagement or a form of it to the local tier, actually there isn't that many trusts that have only opted to give them that role. And indeed, when we wrote about this last year, we very much said that we feel like to limit the local tier's role just to engaging with the local community and wider stakeholders in itself isn't enough. And I think the findings that we're going to talk through today really show that why that's the case. So we'll talk about that in a moment or two. Next slide, please. Brilliant, thank you. So this is just to flag really why we're talking about this in the first place. The local tier, it helps the trust board to achieve a number of things. We've got them here. So just to quickly recap on them, you know, that evidence, it's about equipping the trust board with that school level intelligence to strengthen that decision making, that visible governance. That's about creating a very powerful advocate, I think, for the trust vision and values. Accountable governance, keeping the trust answerable to stakeholders and creating a mechanism for that. Checks and balances, I think, is a really key one, and this is something that we've come back to in the report, which is actually the local tier really does provide an incredible, valuable source of genuine challenge to the trust board, and I don't think we talk about that enough sometimes, and that is within the report. So we'll come back to that in a moment or two. And then finally, collaborative governance. It allows the trust board to really build that local focus on accountability, helping to keep the trust very much answerable to its wider community. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide is really very much based in the definition of governance that we use at MGA that you'll be familiar with, no doubt. And again, I think this very much forms the basis of why we needed to do this report in the first place, because I think that there has been, and I don't think the answers are all there yet, or certainly there's not generally a consensus here, but there has been a lot of debate over the years of exactly where the local tier fits in. You know, I think sometimes we've been scared to talk about the subject of power, but actually when we look at the definition of governance, it's all about power. So actually, if the local tier is a meaningful part of the governance structure, we need to engage in this conversation, the power to make decisions and what decisions they are. And so really, I think there is a question mark here, which is whereabouts does the local tier sit, and how do you involve them? And of course, that will differ from trust to trust. I think in many ways we've largely moved away from the perhaps simpler debate on local autonomy, but there is still very much a question around actually, you know, once an individual school understands that it's the trust that is accountable, it's the trust board that is accountable, and that accountability can't be delegated. Once that's been made clear, actually, how do you work together, and where do you slot the local tier in, and where does the trust board factor in what the local tier is saying, and how does it equip that? And I think these are all legitimate questions that still we really wanted to answer. And so I think this report that we're releasing today really does that. So I guess the question that I'll leave you with for this slide is actually, should the local tier sit firmly in one or two or all four of these columns? And I think there is a key question there. If you can move me on, please, Ryan. Thank you. Contributing to the trust vision. Again, I think this has come through from the conversations that Faria and Meg have had with the 10 different trusts that we've talked to, who varied in terms of size and where they were based. But I think it's really key to base this whole conversation on how the trust of that vision conveys its identity, how it conveys the ambition of the trust, but also for the individual communities that it serves, it works with, that it wants to be a part of, and how are those communities brought in? How does the trust engage the local governing body, the academy committee, whatever you call it, in the visioning process, you know, and that really does dictate how much genuine buy-in there is from schools sometimes. So where does the local tier add most value, and how is that maximized? You know, I think this raises a point on equipping the local tier to fulfill its role in sharing the trust values. And I think, again, that's something that's very much come through this report, using the local tier to cement that trust-wide identity, and not being afraid to seek out views, even if that does mean there is challenge that is coming from the local level, and trust boards and the executive team being very much welcoming of that and proactively engaging with that as well. Next slide, please. Brilliant. So this really brings us on to where we are today. We over a year ago we released the Future is Local thought piece, which very much looked to bring the evidence together into one place, which makes the case for why the local tier needs to remain part of the MAT system going forwards. Now, I think we are at a place where we firmly feel that that argument has been won. You know, I think I was at a conference on Tuesday that had over 100 different MAT executives in the room. I asked that question: do any of you not have local governance in your trusts? There was not one single hand that went up. And I then asked about, is there any of you that can see a system without it being an integral part of it? And again, no hands went up. So, you know, that argument, I think, has very much been explored, and you know, the case has been made. We now wanted to move on to what does the practice actually look like in terms of where trusts are really engaging with the local tier in a way that really makes the entire governance structure run well, and how is the local tier made meaningful. So next slide, please. Thank you. If you've been to any of our events on MAT governance over the last year, you'll be familiar with these now. These are the expectations that we first wrote about a year ago. We've been testing them out over the year, and these very much form the basis, the framework, if you like, from which Faria and Meg have done their interviews and have written the reports. I think it's worth saying before I hand over to Meg and Faria that actually we've also, in the meantime, tested these out on a variety of audiences, events, and whilst, yeah, some might cause a bit more of debate than others, actually there was generally broad consensus, even in events that were made up of entirely of MAT executives, for example. So I think there are some nuances with some of these. Some are pretty much straightforward and non-negotiable. Some there's a bit more flexibility around, but the key thing here is that we have arrived at a set of expectations that we know that trust support and we think offers a key grounding for making local governance meaningful, and actually, whilst we want to still encourage and use the flexibilities offered through the local tier within the MAT system, that's a key strength of it. Actually, there is also a base level, a set of standard expectations that as a sector we need to get behind, and that's really what we've sought to do here. Next slide, please. So this is where I am now. You'll be pleased to hear. Hand over to Meg and Faria, who are going to talk to us about the findings. Please do jump in on the chat with any questions as we go along. and we'll try and come back to them, or we can tackle them as one by one. So Faria, over to you.
Hi everyone, it's really great to be speaking to you all today, and thank you, Sam, for that really crucial scene setting. So I will be discussing half of our key findings and then handing over to Meg, who will present the rest. So before I get into the first key finding on this slide, actually, I thought I'd give you kind of a general backdrop into this section, just to give you a bit of a taste of the things you'll read in the report. So generally speaking, we did find that the extent and nature of delegation to the local tier was not completely identical for trusts, and of course depended on a wide range of things. So specifically, we saw that the individual circumstances of academies in the MAT tended to affect those delegated responsibilities. So, for example, some of the trusts we spoke to saw a greater focus on school improvement, let's say, for schools joining in challenging circumstances, and others, since they had a bit more of a stable backdrop and were generally considered good schools, and I say good with Ofsted definition in mind here, but they had kind of greater capacity in driving some more community-minded change. And one of these examples included a focus on environmental sustainability in addition to their core responsibilities. And I think the main thing we wanted to showcase in this report, and through conversations, particularly in the section about delegation, Sam touched on this earlier, but the idea that the local tier's role is not synonymous with stakeholder engagement, which I think was often conflated to be the case, especially in that embryonic phase of MAT development. And while we were exploring delegated responsibilities, we wanted to move away from the idea that academy committees are no more than stakeholder engagement tools. And as you all know, it's definitely an important section of the local tier's role, but by no means the only one. So more specifically, irrespective of trust size and nature, we did find that largely the local tier in all of our interviews were carrying out similar core functions. And as you can see on this slide, these have been characterized as the 4 S's. So I think each area really speaks for itself, but to just give you a summary of each one, we'll start with standards. So that includes monitoring school performance and improvement, and working with senior leaders to identify areas for improvement and develop strategies that are in line with the trust strategic objectives. And then we have stakeholder engagement, of course, to ensuring the needs and concerns of all stakeholders are accounted for in that decision-making process. And I think the key point to really hone in on here actually is the idea that the local tier acts as a mouthpiece for the stakeholders they represent and share those interests and voices at trust level. Then we have safeguarding, which we all know is massively important. So implementing the trust safeguarding policy and really fostering that culture that prioritizes safety and well-being of all pupils and staff. And it also includes working closely with the Academy's DSL to ensure that the necessary procedures are in place. And this function was typically supported through the appointment of a link governor. That's what we heard. And finally, we have SEND, another really important one. So ensuring kind of adequate resources are provided to pupils with special educational needs that support that educational progress. And I think one responsibility that's kind of attached to this area that I think really lends itself to the local tier's role is the role they have in working in partnership with parents and local external agencies to support pupils with SEND, and again, to ensure that they're included in all aspects of school life. And again, a link governor can really facilitate this work. And we heard that local boards were really making the most of the link governor role here. So in considering this commonality, we think the 4 S's are an effective guide for trusts to use and really take advantage of. So as a minimum, we would hope that all trusts delegate these functions to their academy committees. I think one thing actually that I want to mention, and I think a key takeaway from our conversations is that the idea that trusts should maximize and really tap into that motivation local governors have to give back to their communities and really capitalize on the skills and experiences they have. And ultimately, this comes from delegating responsibilities that I think are meaningful and fulfilling, and in fact quite intentional. And finally, a key point to note in this section is that the 4 S's are by no means an exhaustive list, and or a dictatorial list, I should say, because we recognise and touch on several other functions delegated down, which you will find in the report. So if you can move me on to our next slide, please, Rani. Yeah, so now we'll be looking at an area that actually I think was most interesting for me from a personal perspective, and that's purely because of the differences it generated in practice. So that area would be head teacher, performance management, and the appraisal process as a whole. So as you all know, under the existing structure of MATs, you'll have a CEO tasked with the responsibility of head teacher line management, or in larger MATs, as we saw, a director from the central team or an executive head teacher of some sort. I think Andrew may have mentioned that in the chat. So, while we recognise that the responsibility rightly lies with these individuals, the extent to which academy committees, and particularly chairs, I should say, were involved definitely differed. And what we saw was probably 3 different approaches to the process. So starting with the most hands-on approach, I would say. So some of the local chairs we interviewed did take part in the appraisal process from start to finish. And this included developing objectives in collaboration with their CEO or executive head and recommending pay. So I think the quote on the left-hand side really sums up the essence of that process. And for some, it was a case that the local chair of the respective academy could feed into the process and were consulted by the central team, albeit they did have less of a hands-on role. And for others, it was explained that they weren't involved at all. So some of our interviewees did share concerns about potentially being shut out of these conversations. And one governor actually explained that sometimes it was difficult to reconcile the time that was committed and the lack of involvement in the process overall. And they explained that they weren't able to see that full circle moment, considering they worked alongside their head teachers throughout the year. And some found that quite disappointing. And one interview actually raised a particularly interesting point, I think, which was that in academies where, or who are part of larger MATs, sometimes you have local chairs who may have more one-on-one contact with the head teacher, and that kind of relationship lended itself to potentially having a better understanding of what the head teacher has been dealing with, since it offers a glimpse into the everyday practices of the head teacher. And I think from NGA's point of view, there's no ignoring the general consensus that local governors value that input. And as a minimum, there seems to be an expectation from the local tier and the local governors that we interviewed that they should be involved in the process in some capacity. And that's essentially for a more comprehensive and robust process overall. So if we can move on to the next slide, please, Rani. Thank you. So now we have communication between tiers. And I think quite positively, this was something that was prioritised by all of our interview trusts, and each trust saw strategies in place to really facilitate that two-way communication. And that was definitely something that we saw was welcomed by the local tier. I think the main benefit to come out of this, and that was spoken of quite a lot actually, was the sense of unity and cohesion across the trust through sharing knowledge and best practice. But I think it also helped to break down those barriers between the layers of the organization and really combated this idea of a them and an us. And that's something that we sometimes hear. So that also was really refreshing to hear. And there was a real range of communication channels that were discussed in our interviews, and some of them included chairs forums, governance newsletters, opportunities for local agenda items to be fed up to the trust board, and local governance reports produced by the lead governance professional. So overall, again, there was a really positive response from our interviews, and that sense of connection to the trust board and the decisions they were making really shone through in this section. So in exploring the communication channel that we hear most often about, which is chairs forums, one interviewee raised an important point that these forums were an opportunity to really learn from others governing locally. But what they wanted to avoid were that these vital opportunities weren't being diluted down, especially when they weren't able to engage in that critical and open conversation. And they explain that Chairs Forum simply being used as a platform for perhaps having a central lead deliver a presentation, or only listening to one colleague speak at them, potentially got in the way of an environment that was actually most effective when everybody had the chance to share their ideas and were able to engage in that debate. So I thought that may be something that you may wish to consider when developing and planning these platforms. And again, next slide, please, Rani. And now we move on to the role of the governance professional. So just a quick caveat from me, actually, when I refer to governance professionals in this section, I do mean kind of the umbrella term encompassing all areas in this role. So be that the lead governance professional, who may go by different names, as well as those clerking locally. So that's just a small point to note there. I think what was most refreshing to hear in our conversations was the importance that the local tier placed on their governance professional team. And, you know, it couldn't be overstated enough, actually. And I think what was clear from the governance professionals that we spoke to, that their teams have really formalized governance as this pivotal and professionalized branch of the trust-wide structure. And recognizing that they not only manage governance and coordinate governance across a trust, but they really consider governance on what I described as a bit of a macro level, in that they review wider key issues affecting governance, such as recruitment and retention, diversity on board, and really looking at that scope for future development. So there were 4 key areas that we saw governance professionals have the greatest benefit in. But for the sake of keeping schedule, I'll be discussing 2 of them with you now, and the remaining 2 are discussed at length in the report, which I hope you'll find as interesting as we did. But the first one being organisation and management. So some of the governance professionals that we spoke to developed a specific local governance toolkit that supplemented the trust's scheme of delegation, and it included things like guidance, best practice suggestions, and they also signposted areas that they thought local governors would benefit from additional training. And I think most interestingly, actually, some of the toolkits actually had examples of the types of questions typically asked by governors, and this especially helped newly inducted volunteers and ultimately made that role more manageable and accessible. And then we have fostering that effective communication. So we have already touched on this slightly, but I did want to shine a light on the role of governance professionals here, who are really one of the key drivers in establishing effective communication. And all of our interviewees kind of cited their governance professionals as kind of a wealth of information. So some of the governance professionals we spoke to took this one step further, in that they consolidated information discussed at trust board meetings and specifically identified areas that would benefit the local tier. And this took the form of timely reports. And the governance professional who shared this strategy explained to us that this model has really streamlined conversations taking place at the local level, and allows them to position meetings in a way, but also ensures that local governors are kept informed of the trust strategic vision and that wider ongoing trajectory, and essentially keeping them in the loop. So just to wrap up on this section, actually, I think it's important to highlight the attention that I think governance professional workloads also deserve. You know, our interviews really showed us that the efficiency of governance professionals really affect governance across the trust. And we sometimes heard in our interviews that during periods of trust growth, governance professionals and their teams were under a lot of pressure until further capacity was sourced. So I think this, coupled with the evidence that we have in their role in facilitating effective governance at all levels, is definitely something that requires that ongoing consideration from trusts. So I will hand over to Meg now, who will be talking to you about our remaining key findings.
Thanks, Faria. Just next slide, please, Ronnie. Lovely. So yeah, now we're going to be talking a bit more about collaboration among local chairs and how this is really beneficial to the MAT structure, but also how it could be utilised a bit more for those that are in non-leadership roles. So overall, we found that a MAT achieves really meaningful impact when both vertical and horizontal collaboration are in place. So by vertical collaboration, I mean what we've talked about earlier, ideas being communicated between layers of governance up and down. Horizontal collaboration, we're talking more about how the local level interact and learn from each other. So when these are both present, there's a really, really strong feeling of unity and togetherness with the trust. In terms of morale, so for those in leadership positions, chairs had really good morale because they attend the chairs forums typically. They felt like they belonged to one MAT. They had a greater understanding of the wider MAT context. But when we delved into it and listened about those in non-leadership roles, the morale was slightly worse. They felt a lack of connection sometimes to the MAT. So when we delved into this, we thought, oh, what's going to improve this? We asked our interviewees this. We found that things such as horizontal forums with linked governors really, really help with this. So for example, safeguarding forums where all of the safeguarding individuals would come together, talk about things, share practice and knowledge. And that was especially evident in actually the hub models of local governance, which was a really interesting point. We also saw that board buddying helped with this, to see what other boards are like, again, to get that understanding of what's going on in different boards across the same MAT. That really helped things. And I think other boards as well were clocking on to this idea of the forums and we're starting to put in place ways of setting up a send forum and things like that. But I will mention that vertical collaboration also really helped in this feeling of morale. For example, again, in those with hub models, there would be examples of linked trustees to the local tier, and that involved listening to whatever they had to say, their concerns, emails, attending meetings, and having an agenda item on the trust board that was directly from the local tier to get that intel and to feed that back down. Also having in the hub model a local governor representative attending a trustee-led committee, that local governor didn't have to be someone in a leadership role. That could be anyone from the local tier that wanted to go to that committee to increase that sense of unity. And as you can see there, that quote from the linked trustee saying they personally had experience of what the local tier was like, and that really helped them in that role. So next slide, please, Ronnie. So we're going on to recruitment now. This was a big finding for us, but unfortunately it was unsurprising. Just a bit of a backdrop to recruitment. We continually find that it's a problem for the trust sector and specifically the local sector. So a few stats here, just that 38% of respondents across all board types recorded having 2 or more vacancies on their board this year. And also that overall difficulty in recruiting has jumped from 50% in 2015 to 63% in 2022. And specifically this year, local governing boards reported a nearly 10 percentage point more likely that they're struggling to recruit than trust boards. So that's quite an interesting point to note there. But obviously alongside this, you have the challenge of getting the right people on the board. So that's commitment, skills, knowledge, all of that, which we'll be really aware of. So what exactly did we find in this section? So we found that recruitment was difficult. So that was especially relating to parent vacancies and foundation vacancies, actually, which we'll be finding out more about in the annual survey this year. Specifically, smaller committees placed a greater emphasis on their need for skills in new recruits, which is unsurprising because they really need that assistance in that skills. Also, larger MATs overall, with one school being successful, this didn't always dilute to the other schools within the MAT, which was an interesting point. Governance professionals really helped in this area. They really, were looking for ways to recruit in different places, advertising widely, and they really offered a strong pillar of support to the local tier for what is a really challenging topic. But what what also worked was using purposeful recruitment. So we had an example of a chair being very specific in the skills and wording in their advertisement, how that they wanted new recruits to shadow for a year, and not just to gain skills and knowledge of governance, but also just to make sure that the role's right for them, and that they knew that they were going to be committing to something that they could do, that they would enjoy. And that really worked out well. It worked out in strong retention long term. So that was a really good example. Next slide, please, Rani. And this is just another example of a chair who decided to engage directly with parents. There was an issue going on at the school, which resulted in parents sending in a letter to the school. And basically the chair saw who was replying, saw on the video call who was giving that good weighted argument, and approached them, and ended up appointing someone who reflected the local community and brought actually a really good set of skills to the board. So yeah, that was a really good example. But just one last thing on recruitment, what else could be potentially holding back local boards? We saw examples of several governors joining a board at one time, which meant there was a lack of governance knowledge initially. So there was a bit of a struggle with modelling. The chair would have to take on a lot of extra responsibilities to do that modelling, to show what governance kind of looked like and what was needed. Also, there was often sometimes a lack of knowledge from parents about governance, and that's a two-way street. Governors raising the profile of governance in the school, but also, parents not knowing about it, and that's okay. And it's just building that knowledge up. But also a distrust sometimes towards the education system, which is a big challenge to tackle, to get people onto the board and change that viewpoint. So where that was happening, there was strategies in place long term to try and improve the visibility and communication with the parents there. So next slide, please, Rani. So this is about succession planning. Unfortunately, it was a bit of a nice to have. So we found that it varied amongst trusts and schools within the same trust. And sometimes it did resort to personal, professional connections being used for appointment. We saw one person recruited to a local board, and within 3 months, they had become chair because they're an ex-head teacher. So sometimes it does, when the needs must, you have to use their skills and things. So other approaches, as you can see here, that were used to increase the chances of a potential chair that were successful. So again, like I said, modelling was used, and that was used, like I said, when a lot of new governors were new, but it's getting that skills and knowledge in and knowing what questions to ask right from the off. So that really was helpful in the long term. Like we've talked about as well, board buddying, local governors, seeing how other chairs do things and really taking that on board. Also empowerment. So this involved giving governors the opportunity to chair elements of the agenda to build that confidence and skills over time. So eventually, when the opportunity would arise, that they would feel empowered to take up that role. And also chairing courses. So a limited number of chairs did report that they did those chairing courses, and they were very helpful. So that was great. And it also, I would just like to note that professional development, unfortunately, from what we heard, was more weighted towards local governors in leadership roles. There was a lack of knowledge as to what kind of CPD was going on for those in non-leadership roles, which is a bit worrying, but obviously there's the opportunity there to encourage that to happen. But obviously with workload, it is something has got to be balanced. And yes, the quote there does say that sometimes boards would try and over recruit to hopefully have a chair in the future, as well as using these strategies. So next slide, please, Rani. Lovely. So this is about, it leads on well from this section, but we just wanted to talk about the reputation of the trust in the local area, and how that has a direct impact on the success and impact of the local tier. So those with a strong trust, with a strong image and positive reputation, unsurprisingly, had better recruitment and stakeholder engagement with their local tiers. It was just because they just, they had a stronger reputation in the local area, they got more applications because of this. We had an example where One Trust had a national reputation for a specialty in a certain area, and that resulted in attracting volunteers who wanted to pursue that, help towards that. And obviously schools with a positive reputation also had great stakeholder engagement. They were able to have those conversations with the parents and the teachers, get the responses from the surveys and things. So it just snowballed and was positive for them, I will say. So next slide, please, Rani. So linking to this is that our next key finding was that local governance and trusts could benefit from greater collaboration. And it's really about, this finding is about untapped resource that could be exploited. So we've just heard that there are these strong trusts in the sector. So let's get them sharing their expertise, especially on the local level, as this report shows. You know, if you are a strong local board, you can share that. If you've recruitment of local volunteers, share that good practice, share the panel work, you know, share these things and make your local area a really strong environment and for your children. So we advise that governance development plans include learning from mats outside of themselves, but we didn't always see this materialize, like I said. So for those that did, it was a really, really good thing. One Trust, for example, again, had a speciality in a certain area. They were able to help schools in their local area. They were able to help schools nationally. And it just, you know, if you're doing things well, it's really, really beneficial to share that. And it was a really nice thing that we heard from our report. So we really wanted to highlight that and just show the potential is there. And it's not to, you know, criticize boards that are in areas that are perhaps more difficult to interact with their parents. It's just just a positive thing, just to encourage that sharing of good practice, because we know how difficult things can be, especially with recruitment at the moment. So I think that I'm going to pass back over to Sam at this point. Thank you.
Thanks, Meg. Sorry for a slight delay. I was just replying to a comment in the chat. Brilliant. If you could move me on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So hopefully you all found that interesting, and I think there's some things in there. Some of those findings really very much cement what we've known, what you've known for a considerable amount of time. But I think it's really good that we can document it in that way. I think some of the findings there, though, are actually quite telling of how thinking has shifted, and also I think you know, really key to helping trusts across the country to move on with developing their local governance further. So I think there's some really interesting stuff. And when you get into the report itself, you know, what you've just had there is very much a taster of the key findings, and there's some really interesting points, including quotes directly from the people that we spoke to. So like I say, that report will be going live very, very shortly, so please do have a look at that, and yeah, have a good read. So I just wanted to draw in some concluding points. Emma, I'm just wondering if there's any questions that you've seen that I haven't answered, or am I okay to move on to the conclusions?
I think, in fact, people have been quite quiet. I thought on local governance, given it's been such a big topic, hasn't it? Wherever we go around the country and talk about trust governance, local governance is one of the things that is brought up, or it's, you know, certainly when you and I are doing keynotes, whether the audience is trustees or executives, as you've mentioned, both local governance, and also I have to think the second question that always comes up with me is recruitment. And I know there's been a couple of comments on that. But I mean, I think the experience amongst delegates today on local governance is huge, but I can't see anybody particularly putting their hand up now. But of course, they haven't read the report, so that's fair enough if people don't want to jump in straight away. So yes, it might be worth saying, Sam, I'm now probably going to steal your thunder from the last 2 seconds, but although we're changing things a little bit on September the 25th to make sure it's not completely repetitive, you and Megan Freer and some of the trusts that were involved in the research will be doing a workshop, won't you? So that will be very much the trust speaking as well, or the local governors and also governance professionals speaking. So there will be more richness on that day as well. So no, I'll leave you to make your concluding remarks.
No, thanks, Emma. And I think that is an important point, because I know actually, you know, when we're in a room together, it's much easier to have a real conversation. So we will make lots of time for that in that session on the 25th of September. Yeah, that would be great. But yeah, just as a few concluding points, really, I think you would hopefully all agree that the case has very much been made, and we now have some really great examples of how the local tier can contribute to the successful governance within a trust if there is a genuine commitment to some of the things that we've talked about. Obviously, we would argue all of them, but I think actually what we've gone through today offers very much a framework really for moving on. And I think some of the points here are very much some of the things that have come out in the discussion already. But I do think it's worth honing in on a couple of these. The opportunities exist to expand communication. I think that's a really important one. We've been talking about communication channels for an awful long time in terms of the local tier, but I think, you know, we are still very much establishing what has worked from the last few years, particularly as we all kind of moved to embracing more virtual technology for meetings and so on. Actually, you know, whilst we've kind of I was thinking the other day that the days of lockdown and stuff suddenly feel like a very long time ago now, but actually there are some key things that we have been able to build from that in terms of getting the tiers of governance within a trust talking to each other and communicating, and I think that remains very much so. The point around ensuring those in non-leadership roles have the chance to collaborate with others, I think that's was a really interesting one that needed pulling out, because I think, you know, rightly we've often focused on the chair of the trust board meeting with chairs across the trust and so on, but actually, you know, we need to always come back to remembering the point that a committee as a collective and not an individual. So I think, you know, what are those opportunities to equip that to happen, whether that's within the trust through forums and so on, or whether it's going wider than that. I think there's lots of opportunities there. And the workload point, I think is something that you will see us coming back to lots over the next year. It's very much a key focus for us, so I'm not going to go into that now, but keep your eyes open on that. If you can move me to the next slide, please. And just as I move into this slide, the report will now be live, it says, without checking the website, but this is the time it was due to go live. So it will be there now. But I think really for making a sort of concluding case, the I think from NGA's perspective, certainly from the perspective of those of you that we've spoken to who govern in MATS, whether it be at trust board level, whether it be at a local level, whether you're a governance professional, there is a real consensus that whilst the way that local governance can be done can vary hugely, and the journey to getting it right has often some ups and downs. And I don't think we're saying that with the expectations that we're setting that you're necessarily never going to have any of those. There is an element as new schools join a trust. It is a big shift still for those new schools and volunteers who perhaps governed in a maintained school setting to suddenly face a very different way of doing things. So there are still some key conversations to be had, but using these expectations, I think, really can help ground and set both the remit and the limitations of the role. We talked about scheme delegation in the chat earlier. I think that is absolutely key. And when we talk about the 4 S's, why not? Why shouldn't we base our scheme of delegation around that? If that's what we're doing, I think it should make it absolutely clear. And that's very much as I mentioned, something that we're doing with the re-release of our guidance as well. The expectations, like I said, I think are there now, and actually our part in all of this is to kind of spread them far and wide. We've been doing that over the last year. We'll continue to do that, but we have a crucial moment really as the department consults on its quality trust descriptions, and we're very much doing what we can to feed that into those conversations. So I think that the more that we can keep this conversation going, the better for all trusts. So I've ended there with a little bit of a quote from one of the conversations. I could talk to you about this stuff all day, but I'm not going to do it justice. I think go and have a look at the report, have a read. I think it's a brilliant piece of work that Megan Furrier have done. So I just want to say a big thank you to Megan Furrier for doing that, and a huge thank you to the 10 trusts that have contributed. And it takes guts, I think, to be honest and to have those transparent conversations. So they've done, I think, that the sector a real service in doing that. So we're really, really grateful to them, and to all of you for coming along today and feeding in your views and anything else that you want to feed back. We can't do this without you. All of this is based on your experiences, the things that you tell us, the ups and downs. So please do keep the conversation going with us. It's really important. I've just got 1 or 2 slides left. Ron, if you can move me along. It's just to flag up a few things. Our governance training for trusts and school leaders, in case this isn't something you're aware of. Like I said, the slides will be shared, so you'll get these links. But do have a look at that. Do get your leaders booked on to those, regardless of what setting you're in. We've had some excellent feedback, and I think it's a wonderful resource. So do have a look at that. Next slide, please. And again, we've got obviously a whole bunch of different opportunities for those governing as well, including the leading governance sessions, whether you're a governance professional or a chair or a MAT trustee. So do have a look at those as well. And if you can move me along, please. Wonderful. Our welcome to governance sessions are for anyone who's new to governance on your boards. We've got different versions of these depending on which setting people are governing. So again, if this is something that you haven't been aware of, you can go on our website and find out a bit more about that. Thank you. And then finally, just to flag up our upcoming events. We've got a webinar coming up on 25th of May looking at complaints. I know that's something that came up earlier in John's session. So I think it's a really key topic of conversation. So do have a look at that. Being strategic webinar very much follows the release of the new edition of that, which we're really excited about. And then we've got our summer conference. So if you haven't booked on yet, do book in, and we've got a really exciting program. Love to see you there as well. And then just as a plea, really, do remember the rearranged actual MAC conference on the 25th of September. We really can't wait to see you there. It's going to be a fantastic day. We're going to have a wonderful program. So please do prioritize that. And finally, all that is left for me to say is thank you so much for giving up your time and joining us today. We are so grateful that you have joined us, made this a really good and informative discussion, and you know, always welcome any feedback, any thoughts you've got. Like I said, slides will be shared as well, but thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you soon. Thank you.